The Book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, the Covenant Tablet of Shabuwa, Chapter 5. And it came to pass that we once again gathered to record the vision, and when placing the Urim upon the Thummim, the vision was immediately before my eyes. And I was at the upper pool in Nod, at the dwelling place of our first parents. And their home was a cavity in a rock, and it was in a cliff between two waterfalls. And they raised all their children there, all 34 of them, which number includes the 3 children of their son Matteniah, who was slain. And there was a constant sound of water cascading down and gurgling over stones. And the stream was small enough and fell such a short way that their dwelling place was not filled with mist. And the water of both falls fell from just a little farther up than a tall person could reach, and the distance between the falls was about 100 paces, so that the pool at the west end was tranquil. And the opening of their dwelling was on the north side, with a small stream running east to west between the falls. So the sunlight of a new day came to shine directly upon them late in the morning. And I see a little lad, and he is well built, and like all the ancient people, his arms are round and smooth without rippling muscles. Yet they were strong, and this lad appears to be about 10 years old, and he is the 7th son of Yaatsekawd, and I see that he is greeting the dawning light with his prayers to Anokeesed, and he is sprinkling some element of worship from his fingers upon the ground to thank Motzah for the joy of a new day. And he is thanking the sun for being ever faithful, and I can feel that he is making determinations about the course of his new day. And by the looks of it, this is his daily practice. And after he is done, I can see him going over to where the clear, pure water falls over the brink into the lower pool. And right where the water curves over to spill over the edge, he is kneeling down upon a flat stone, and with more prayer, he puts more element upon the water. And I am very moved by what I feel as he does this, because he is asking Motzah, the living water, to accompany him all through his day. And I am struck at watching him sprinkle the element upon the water as it rolls over the edge, because it looks exactly like how the edge of eternity looks, as the love of Anokeesed spilled over the edge of eternity, and it felt just the same. And remember, it was on that very occasion in Elda where Motzah first received his name. And I could plainly feel with this little son what he actually felt when he cupped his hands to drink, for in his heart it was a living example of what he felt with the forgiveness of his Redeemer. And the cool, refreshing, and comforting feeling in the drink of water is giving him life and abundance. And every time he drinks throughout the day, it is a reminder of who is going with him all day long. And even though he is young, he is very strong in his spirit, and I marveled at the sight of it. And it is important to understand that the water to this lad is the element of righteousness that will magnify in his soul, and his ability to be patient to listen throughout his day, and his ability to listen applies to the Lord, the Eerkodeshiy, and his fellows. And he considers if he did not do this each and every day, that he would find himself separate and alone from those voices that guide him in his daily walk. And because he is a boy who will grow to become a man, his focus and conscious awareness is pointed toward that which is going forward and outwardly in his influencing others, for them to be loved and respected, and the spirit of his innocent love is thus released, to move out to encompass all who he encounters, and in the midst of the Eerkodeshiy, both in the present moment and in the future, in like manner as the flowing water. And as I look at him and am able to see and feel all these things, I am amazed at how one so young could be so holy and righteous. And in that moment, I am able to hear his name, and he is named Zakar. Reference number 32. Strong's Concordance number 2142. Because he desires to be mindful of the Lord and always remembers him, and he sees Motzah and his love for him to be the reason he performs every task, and the spirit of his holy presence is his guide in all he would say in his daily walk. And it came to pass that I sat pondering this for a few moments, and I marveled at the power of this little lad, and the Spirit caused me to discern that Zakar longed with a strong desire to see and know more of the spirits of life in creation. And he wanted to come to understand concerning the living presence of Motzah, the Lamb in them. And because of this, I see that Yaatsekawd took little Zakar with him on a long journey. And it seemed unusual to me because Yaatsekawd was not a traveler. And so it felt like he was doing this especially to teach his son the righteous longings of his heart. And Yaatsekawd taught only that which he himself was taught in Eden, regarding how to use the spirits of life that were put into all things, and to not vary away from all those expressions of what he called the living love of Anokeesed. And it came to pass that they set out on their journey, and I wondered how they would provide for themselves, seeing Yaatsekawd was not a hunter. And I saw that they followed the little stream of their encampment of Nod, down to where it joined to a larger stream that went down toward the river Simca. And further on they came to a place where two larger streams came together to form the Simca River proper, that runs into Ariel Sea. And the low-lying flatlands there were filled with game birds and fish in abundance, and the marshy places held an abundance of roots and seeds to eat. And it was the intention of Yaatsekawd to teach his little son Zakar righteousness and the holy relationships with the spirit of life in creation, and a holy relationship with the Lord and the elements in creation. And I am surprised at what I see with Yaatsekawd, and also crucially informed because I see him doing exactly what he did when he helped transform Olam into Eden. And somehow I had it in my mind that he only defined the elements of creation then at that time. And after Eden was formed, he stopped defining and entering into element together with his spirit and with the presence of Motzah the Lamb. But now I see him doing the same thing here with his little son in the temporal earth. And Yaatsekawd is filled with the presence of Motzah. And they literally walk together. And also Yaatsekawd is filled in his own right with a great presence of love for all life. In every new thing that he came across, he reaffirmed the presence and condition of Eden in it with his love. And in this way, he comforted the Eerkodeshiy in the temporal world. And it occurred to me that we could do the very same thing to this day. And we too can speak to the many Eerkodeshiy and reaffirm the presence of their Creator in them and communicate and act upon the presence of our own visions in them to delight their hearts and to remind them of the desires of Anokeesed in creation. And this is important because the wicked can, with many repetitions of their cold and empty acts, cause a shadow to creep over them to obscure their awareness of the love that they were created to express and obscure their joy in their fulfillment. And all along their journey, I saw him doing the same thing. And I saw him looking at some billowing clouds drifting along, having beautiful shades of blue, white, and gray. And Zakar was watching too. And upon viewing Yaatsekawd gazing at them, I could discern that he knew he lived in those clouds, together with Anokeesed and Motzah. And he said to Zakar, I wonder what Anokeesed is doing as he passes by, looking down upon us. And Zakar said, he is loving all that he sees with a gentle tenderness, without any distinction between the good or the evil. And because Zakar had used his element with the dawning sunlight and the water, his ability to be patient and to listen was magnified, and his father used very few words. And his vocabulary was limited to only the words of Anokeesed spoke to him in Eden, and I think he tried to avoid learning any new words from others during his life, in an attempt to retain what he felt in Eden. But Zakar could hear both what his father was saying and feeling, and the soul of Zakar was enlarged. And it came to pass that Zakar desired greatly to see where the stream of his dwelling place went on its journey, and he asked, does its journey ever end? And they traveled on, clear to the marshes on the north side of the Ariel Sea. And Zakar was able to see where the brook Simca entered into the sea, and he exclaimed, look, Father, the brook is entering as if to go into eternity, and it can rest from its traveling at last. And after those days in Maween, in the eyes of the people, Zakar became a real clear example of what it meant to be clean. And since ancient times, the concept of being clean means to fill with and be joined in your soul with Motzah the Lamb, and his presence in the elements of the earth that gives them life for you. And clean is still defined in this way by the communities of the righteous and by the people of the Lord. And being clean is also associated with water, because the name of the man that Anokeesed became is Motzah, which name means the living water. And that is why baptisms and washings have more meaning to the righteous than merely being temporarily clean in their physical bodies, for the living water cleanses the soul. And it came to pass that I continued to look with Urim, and I can see that Zakar came to marry a wonderful maiden named Rahid, reference number 33, Strong's Concordance number 7209, pronounced Rahid. And she was his sister, and she was the 12th child of Chavah, and she is the feelings of the heart of her husband made flesh. And I see her also sprinkling element, while standing facing the dawning light in preparation for her encounter with the sun, in order to commence with her day. And she too joins with the water each day as she greets the Lord. And instead of using the water with element like Zakar, she looks at her reflection in the water. And I am startled at what she feels as she does this, for I would have assumed that she would be seeing how she looked by her reflection in the water. But instead she considered that she could see that she lived in the water with Motzah, and her perfect self lived there. And that is to say, that the person she was created to be lived there with the Lord. And this awareness would urge her to always be repentant, so she could remain close to her perfect self, because it is the view of her that comes from forgiveness that forms her image in the water. But in the world, when a person views their reflection, the only thing that comes to mind is the image of you as seen by others. And such images draw you to desire to conform to the sensitivities of society rather than to how Motzah views you. Therefore, it behooves the righteous to avoid mirrors in such images. And this was again exactly what her father Yaatsekawd felt when he considered the definition of his spirit of life in creation. And sweet little Rahid put element on the water so that she could draw inward through her eyes the feelings of the truth in Motzah the Lamb, and she drank him in with her eyes. As she drank the water in her hand, and drinking water out of a hand is to drink in your perfect self. And when drinking from the two cupped hands of your spouse, it means to drink their soul into yours. And it can also be done with a dear friend in the Lord. And for her, the cool, refreshing taste and feeling of the water reminded her to be happily attached to the circumstances of her day. And to her, it was the element of righteousness to enlarge her patience during an uncomfortable or undesirable task, so that she would always see into the lives of others and allow the Eerkodeshiy to aid her in her understanding, and so she could be wise in all her ways. And she drank in the feelings of forgiveness for both herself, and as she forgave others, and the living water entered into her and gave life to a mother who was a giver of life. And I could see that this wonderful couple, when they were married using the rocks of the brook Simcha, purposefully, diligently, and intelligently drank in Motzah every day. And a marvelous thing came before my eyes, for I saw the example and practice of these two people burst forth to become the founding principle of that which the entire people of Maween practice in their powerful acts of righteousness in their daily lives. And the spiritual power of these two children permeated their entire world, and thus little children led the righteous people of Maween before the flood. And it came to pass that Chavah took Rahid on a journey up upon Reshaneh to teach her what it meant to be a woman and a daughter of the mountain. And Rahid beheld the headwaters of the brook Simcha that held the image of her perfect self. And Rahid called the mountain grandmother. And she gazed down at the far reaches of creation and saw the vastness of life that came from her, and the soul of Rahid was enlarged. And it is a joy to record that I see Rahid teaching the other girls what to feel when they look into the still water. And I see them laughing together and being very happy. And the girls would tap the reflection of one another with a twig. and they would exclaim their delight that the forgiveness of Motzah would bring the image of their perfect self back together again as the waters settled down again. And it came to pass that Zakar and Rahid went on to have a large and happy family, and it looks to me like there must be more than 12 children. And among their sons there was one named Bar, reference number 34, Strong's Concordance number 1250, because he knew how to speak loving kindness to the Asib, reference number 35, ancient name for wheat, so that it prospered and grew in abundance. And he married a daughter of Emery of Nod, who was a daughter of Matteniah, who was slain, and her name was Reka, reference number 36, Strong's Concordance number 7347, because it was prophesied at her birth that she would be the elder among women, and how to make excellent bread out of very finely ground flour, because it is the element of righteousness that shows forth the salvation that comes from Motzah. And she highly prized her Kelly, which is the stone in which she cooked her bread, and Bar, reference number 37, Strong's Concordance number 1250, whose name means to winnow wheat, together with Reka, followed in all the ways of their parents, and they were stalwarts among the people in Maween. And it came to pass that Reka gave birth to twin sons, and one was named Zanak, and the other was named Shub. And Zanak came out first. And Zanak married a daughter of Yaakov, who was left behind in her father's haste, to escape the trauma and fear of the murder of Matteniah. And she was just a little thing, and her name was Didi, reference number 38, Strong's Concordance number 1768 and number 1669. And she was very injured by being left behind, and profoundly affected by it. And grandmother Rihi raised her, and as she grew into adulthood, she desired to assert herself to control others, so that she may never again be abandoned. And it came to pass that she and Zanak began to have children, and to face the normal pressures of life. And Zanak began to be influenced by the feelings of the need to be satisfied. And those feelings were how Bad plied his wayward feelings upon him. And Didi, being the feelings of his heart made flesh, became strong to want things around her, to give her a sense of security from want and abandonment. And she continually had bad dreams of being cast out empty. And when Zanak and Didi began to express dissatisfaction, those of the residents of Nod became perplexed and could not understand, and they looked upon such sentiments with wonder. And Zanak and Didi began to feel ashamed, and they felt alone in Nod in their desires for satisfaction, which comes from demanding the complete and immediate fulfillment of a need or a want, and temporal things cannot fulfill a spiritual or emotional need. And it came to pass that Zanak heard tales of his grandfather Zakar, about the place where the two streams join to form the river Simca, and of the bounty there of fish and waterfowl and hunting game. And it came to pass that after Zanak scouted out the way, he removed his family from Nod and traveled there with their children, and they set up camp, and had to learn how to make their dwelling out of reeds. And they established themselves there all alone. And Didi suffered in her loneliness and insecurities from being abandoned. And Zanak was not able to listen so he could hear what she felt, because he never did use any element upon the water. And before spring they had established a settlement there, and they named it Radaf, reference number 39, Strong's Concordance number 7291. And it was a hunting and fishing camp. And they heard Bad whispering in their ears that they could find the satisfaction of possessions by laying claim over the land round about to own it, and the earth itself and the rivers could belong to them. And Zanak was a very skilled hunter, and travelers who passed by soon spread the word abroad about how easy it was to live there, and how abundance could come to them there, and that they did not have to share. And I saw that Didi felt secure with the idea of owning the land, and she felt that she could never be abandoned again, but all would be bound to the land. And it came to pass that soon others gathered there, who also were intent upon pursuing the satisfaction of possessions. And when they arrived, Zanak was the boss. and he would allow them to hunt and fish, but he had to be given his small part. And they did not mind giving a portion to him because they did not have to share the rest. And everyone owned their own things, and nothing was shared, nor was it lent. And competition was first seen in the land, and Bad was delighted to learn of it. And it became an important tool of his in his promotion of dominance over your fellows. And Zanak became known as the chief of Radath, and he began to be lifted up in his own eyes. And Bad found a new way to prosper when he learned to prey upon insecurities. And the cruel sin of abandonment caused his domain to expand and magnify tribulations in their world. And Radath began to be a notable settlement, and people began to gather there, until upward of 60 or 70 people lived there. And soon word spread that there was a settlement in the Simca Valley that had a chief who was able to live off of the labors of others. And all who lived there did whatever he did, and one could get ahead of others there to find honor. And now Enoch, who was the son of Kenneh, who had murdered his brother, heard of the camp called Radath, and he had a son named Irad. And Enoch grew up without a father, because his father abandoned his mother Awan, after they went down into Yashiyah. And Enoch was without companions, and his mother Awan was very wicked in all her desires, and Enoch was lonely. And when Enoch heard of Radath, it was very appealing to him that there could be such a place, and that it had a chief, and Enoch desired to live with others, especially if they would obey him, because then he would have the satisfaction of dominance, and he would never be alone, and all his companions would always do his bidding, so that he may never be found to be of little repute. And so Enoch sent his son Irad to visit Radath, and he expected him to report back about how such a gathering could be accomplished. And Irad came to Radath, and he presented himself as simply someone who wanted to live there. And his grandfather Kenneh never would have done this, because his only desire in his shame was to be alone. But Bad was able to tempt Enoch in his sin, because he was raised without a good father, who would teach him confidence in his manhood. And it was among the first consequences of the injury of fatherlessness in the earth. And the Eerkodeshiy grieved, because they never could have anticipated how someone with a father would behave, nor what kind of person they would turn out to be. And Bad looked upon all this with keen interest. And it came to pass that Irad spent a season in Radath, spying on them, and he conducted himself in the same way as any other resident there. And Bad was able to add a new dimension to the act of lying. And Irad learned all about the satisfaction of possessions, and of how the desire for possessions could allow one who wanted to be prominent to find dominance over his fellows. And he learned how to express dominance, starting with laying claim to the land and to all it contained. And he learned that Zanak and Didi did not have to work, but lived on their portion of the hunt. And Irad was taken by how happy Didi was, and he had it on his mind to find a woman like her to be his wife and do much of his work for him. And after the fall harvest, Irad returned to Enoch his father with the news, and he reported that Enoch could well establish himself with such a settlement in the richness of the lands north of the Shaman Sea. And thus was the first city come into being, and it was called the city of Enoch. And after a while, Enoch sent people down to Radath with enticing news of the bounty to find in his city. And there were stories of grandeur and wealth, with much provisions for each person. And by these means he lured away almost all of those who had settled at Radath. And soon Zanak and Didi were left alone, and they had to work. And now their labor was dreary for them, and life became bitter with no one to oversee. And the children cried, and the Eerkodeshiy grieved, and Motzah found his burden. And it came to pass that a traveler brought word to Shub that his twin brother now dwelt all alone and was in distress. And Shub and his wife Dara, reference number 40, Strong's Concordance number 1873, 1862, and 1843, knew that Didi would suffer once again with the terrible feelings of abandonment. And Shub and Dara were filled with love, and they were wise with the leadings of the spirit of Motzah. And this wisdom and understanding was able to come to them, because she looked to understand, and he was careful to listen. And she was named Dara, because she was charitable and diligent to look to understand. But most of all, she was named Dara, because she was diligent to see reflected in the water the perfect self of others that dwelt in the living water. And she would always assume the best of Didi, to think pleasant and loving thoughts about her, and her soul shone forth with the light of understanding. And Didi sank into the distress of her many trials, and Zanak began to be oppressed with shame. And thus we can see how bad can lead the souls of men to the brink of despair, by magnifying their injuries and weaknesses, and in this way cut them off from the strength to be gained, by being joined to the presence of Motzah that resides in the Eerkodeshiy and in one another. And there was accusations and dissensions, and the sounds of death that reached into the hearts of those in heaven. And the hills surrounding Radaf mourned, and the waters of Simca were dismayed, and the sounds of death drove away the migrating birds. And the spirits of life there did not express the joy of living. And it came to pass that the Eerkodeshiy reported all this to Shub, and he felt the hills feeling empty of the happiness of the feet of his brother. And the wind languished to speak to Didi with the breath of God. And Shub and Zanak looked exactly alike. And I see the family of Shub packing up all their things, and they have many children, and they each have little bundles, and this precious little family all set out to rescue Zanak and Didi. And I have to say it is quite a sight to see so many children all in a line bobbing along with their little bundles. And it is notable for me to say here that Shub did not intend to just go alone to reprove his brother and urge him to repent and return home to his starting place, because Shub and Dara were wise, and they did not measure the cost, and they could discern how hard it would be for one with shame to repent and be humble. But they chose instead to go and live with them, to bring them the comfort of companionship, and to love them back into righteousness and back home to Nod, into their rightful place before Anokeesed. And when they arrived, they moved into an abandoned dwelling, and the sounds of life began to be heard once again in Radaf, and the wind danced with joy once again over the plain and across the hills. And the children laughed and played, and the migrating birds stopped over their long journey, and the Eerkodeshiy shooed the Decadarchiy away. And they said to them by the voice of the thunder, "Get ye hence, this is holy ground, because the hills love the steps of freedom." And the river Simca can be seen to be the body of Anokeesed, in his ability to nourish his children once again. And smiling faces were seen again, and the spirits of life in creation spoke softly of repentance to Zanak and Didi. And the gentle love of Anokeesed invited them back to their visions, and the rich spirit of reproval presided and gently covered the settlement. Now when the company from Nod arrived, they brought gifts of food and clothing and little things the children had made, and they stayed through the fall and winter. And those 2 seasons worked the wonders of their definitions to contribute their part, and fall fell, gathering to their family, and winter feels resting together with each other. And Anokeesed looked on from the passing clouds, and he saw that hearts were healed with love. And Zanak repented mightily before the Lord, drawing strength from his brother. And he was born again to know what Anokeesed meant to him, and sweet forgiveness had its effect. And he was born again unto salvation with the undeniable love of Anokeesed that issued forth from the family of his brother. And now he would never let loose of what Anokeesed meant to him. But Didi took longer because of her injuries, and at Nod she had healing ceremonies, and in time she was healed and restored by unceasing and enduring love. And the vision of her created purpose was able to come to her by her obedience, when she learned to view her perfect self in the water. And in the spring they all arrived back in Nod, and it was not like a prodigal son coming to his bitter end, with no alternative but to return home, because Zanak and Didi were sought after, and followed into their abyss with love, and love found them, and they returned home back to life. Reference number 41. This is foundational to how the righteous will serve the Lord during the great gathering. And it is said that the family of Zakar and Rahid are known as the family of deliverance, and the grandparents of cleanliness and the waters of Nod bore fruit in them. And it was made known to me that their family was among the first to return to Eden after their old parents. And I can see an interesting thing. Both the Eerkodeshiy and the Decadarchiy learned very providential lessons, and the Decadarchiy learned that they could collect people to follow them who could be controlled by their strong pursuit of the satisfaction of possessions, making it possible for the wicked to extend power and control over them, so the wicked could obtain the satisfaction of dominance, and it was called a city. And the city of Enoch, son of Kenneh, was the first city upon the earth to express this tool of evil. And the Eerkodeshiy learned that the righteousness of Zakar and Rahid to walk with the Lord each and every day became the guiding light for communities, and even as children they led the way in Maween. And the Eerkodeshiy learned the difference between cities and the countryside, with villages, camps, and settlements, and that which Zakar and Rahid did in righteousness became a sure example for communities, and thus little children led the people of Nod and Maween. And it had remained to this day that the righteous will daily follow Motzah the Lamb in all their dwelling places wherever he leads with his spirit. And the Eerkodeshiy decided that they would never allow this foundation to be supplanted during all the course of the earth. And this is the third decision of the first great sevening. And they chose to embrace the people in their simple love in communities, with their sharing in selfless loving kindness one towards the other. And they decided that the possessions of any among the righteous who had all things in common would consist only of that which Anokeesed gave them, to reveal and sustain their visions of created purpose. And by this it can be seen that the gifts of parents to their children should be intended to magnify their visions, to help enable them to be raised up to live their lives, to fulfill the desires of Anokeesed for them, and possessions are not to be given them that reinforce the satisfaction of possessions. And in the third decision of the first great sevening, the Decadarchiy chose to establish cities with the honor that comes from personal ownership of wealth, even to the point of owning the earth and becoming merchants of men. And they were cunning with this choice, because it was determined by them that by the satisfaction of possessions, multitudes would live out their lives pursuing that which would leave people empty, unhappy, and unfulfilled with wasted lives, having rejected their real gift of life, and they would have abandoned every expression of the expectations for them in the gentle heart of Anokeesed. And with the ensuing dominance of the few over the many, the earth saw poverty, sorrow, and jealousy, and violence abound among the wicked, and the sounds of death drowned out their gift of life among them. This concludes the Book of Remembrance of Melchizedek, the Covenant Tablet of Shabuwa, Chapter 5. Shalom.